The first oil well created was in 1859 by a man named Colonel Edward Drake. George H.W. Bush was the first to present the U.S. in the Mexican Gulf, and President Clinton extended it to 2012. Therefore, after 2012, the U.S. will have to renew their lease to be in those international waters or find oil elsewhere. To find these oil reservations deep in the ocean, the companies have to send seismic waves into the ground, and the waves bounce back so the topography can be seen. The downside is that these waves affect the wildlife in the ocean because sounds travel much easier and at higher volumes in the water. Passing whales, for example, are harshly affected by these seismic waves, and it often leads to them swimming onto the beach to escape the harsh sounds. There was one incident in Madagascar where the search for oil led to over 100 whales beaching themselves. Populations of the ecosystems where an oil spill happens can be extremely affected. The ecosystem where the Exxon Valdez spill happened is finally repopulating with its larger predators, and it has been over 20 years. This shows that when an oil spill happens, the ecosystem in that area has to go through the whole process again, starting with the small harmless creatures leading up to the large predators. Oil rigs are found all along the coastline of the Pacific Ocean and the Gulf of Mexico. Interaction with local ecosystems happens through treaties and other agreements. States only own up to 3.5 miles away from their coastline. Treaties are a must to be able to drill in international waters. Land is only leased, meaning land is only given for a designated amount of time before it goes up for auction again. To drill on a certain land, nations first have to flatten it and clear all wildlife in the area. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill took place in the Gulf of Mexico, which is bordered by 5 U.S. states: Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas; 6 Mexican states: Tamaulipas, Veracruz, Tabasco, Campeche, and Yucatan; and the island of Cuba. The Gulf runs 4,000 miles from north to south and approximately 1,000 miles from east to west. Its depth reaches up to 12,000 feet and consists of a total area of 60,000 miles squared. 20 major river systems drain into the Gulf, with 85% of the fresh water coming from the United States. 64% of that fresh water comes from the Mississippi River. Gulf fisheries are very productive, giving the U.S. alone up to 1.7 billion pounds of fish, shrimp, and oysters a year. Deepwater Horizon oil spill began with an explosion and fire on April 20th. Since then, oil has been pouring into the Gulf from a blown-out undersea well at about 210,000 gallons per day. At least 4 million gallons of oil have spilled since the explosion. At this rate, the spill would surpass the 11 million gallons spilled in the Exxon Valdez disaster by Father's Day. The blast resulted in the death of 11 of the workers. The drilling rig Deepwater Horizon is owned by Transocean Ltd. And leased by BP plc, which is in charge of cleanup and containment. Predictions for oil movement have been seen in maps for forecasting the oil slick to continue moving west, towards American states and possibly into the Mississippi River. Oil spreads half a football field a second across water. The movement of oil. The biochemistry behind the Deepwater Horizon oil spill is not simple science. Methane containment domes transport oil from the ocean floor to ships above. During this incident, a bubble of methane gas shot up a tube and burst out of the tube, causing oil to leak into the water. Then a leftover case came up and ignited a room on the oil rig. A combination of the water and the oil is what created the methane bubble. These bubbles are capable of causing tsunamis. Dispersants are used on occasions like these as chemical agents used to break up concentration in oil. An organic material to make it easier to evaporate before it reaches the shore. The objective of dispersant use is to transfer oil from the water surface into the water column. When applied before spills reach the coastline, dispersants will potentially decrease exposure for surface-dwelling organisms and intertidal species, while increasing it for water column and benthic species. Examples of surface-dwelling organisms are seabirds and otters, and intertidal species are those similar to mangroves and salt marshes. Fish, corals, and oysters are part of water column and benthic species. While dispersants help a lot in the removal of oil from the ocean, a significant amount of oil is still able to reach the shorelines. Unfortunately, only so much dispersant can be added, for it is toxic to the sea life. The Exxon Valdez oil spill occurred with the crash of the tanker on Bligh Reef in Prince William Sound, Alaska on the morning of March 24, 1989. This ship was on the way to Long Beach, California from Valdez, Alaska when it encountered some ice on the ocean. This oil spill is considered to be one of the largest human-caused disasters ever recorded in history. The man in charge, Joseph Jeffrey Hazelwood, maneuvered the ship to travel outside the normal shipping lanes in an attempt to avoid the ice. His plan did not work as well as he planned for. Approximately 10.9 million gallons of its 53 million gallon cargo of oil spilled within 6 hours of his failed decision. The tanks were filled with Prudhoe Bay crude oil, and of the 11 on board, 8 of them were damaged. What made the Exxon Valdez the largest oil spill dated in U.S. waters was its impact over 10,000 square miles across Alaska's coastal seas. That is the same as an area the size of Connecticut, Delaware, Rhode Island, and 25 Washington, D.C.s put together. Seashore cleanup did not begin until April of 1989 and went on until September of that same year. The shoreline monitoring cleanup on the summer months were not limited like the one in the winter months during 1990 and 1991. Oil continues to contaminate beaches and national parks to this day. When the Exxon Valdez spill first happened, people would ask themselves, could it happen again? Or would an oil spill of this scale be possible? And with the Deepwater Horizon spill, we think it may happen again. It isn't the size of the Exxon Valdez spill yet, but it is predicted that it will be far bigger than the Exxon Valdez spill if we don't get it cleaned up right away. The oil from oil spills actually makes up just about 8% of the oil spilled into the ocean yearly. Natural seepage from the seafloor is over 8%. Hydrocarbon particles from onshore air pollution about 13%. If oil waste reaches a shoreline or coast, it interacts with sediments such as beach sand and gravel, rocks and boulders, vegetation, and terrestrial habitats of both wildlife and humans, causing erosion as well as contamination. Waves, water currents, and wind move the oil onto the shore with the surf and tide. Oil waste poisons a sensitive marine and coastal organic substrate, interrupting the food chain on which fish and sea creatures depend and on which their reproductive system success is based on. Commercial fishing enterprises may be affected permanently. Wildlife other than fish and sea creatures, including mammals, reptiles, amphibians, and birds that live in or near the ocean, are also poisoned by oil waste. Property values decrease when oil is affecting a coastline. Therefore, landowners are affected as well. And if the amount of oil spilled is extensive enough, the gas prices are sure to go up.